Hi, in this video we'll be continuing with the C# tutorials. So we'll be going over input validation. So input validation is the process of inspecting data that has been input to a program to make sure it is valid before it is used in a computation. So in the previous video we learned about using the TryParse methods. So we first learned about the parse methods, and then about the TryParse methods to validate the type of data entered by the user. So you should also validate the accuracy of the data that is entered by the user. So basically in computer programming, they have something called garbage in, garbage out, or GIGO. You may have heard about it before. It refers to the fact that computers cannot tell the difference between good input and bad input. So whether good or bad input, the computer won't know. You have to program it to know, so that it knows what data is being used. So let's say we have an example, a payroll program that accepts the number of hours that an employee has worked in a given week as input. If the payroll clerk accidentally enters 400 hours instead of 40 hours, obviously well, this actually happened to me as well. The army did this to me actually. When I was in the army, they paid me. Maybe they were just trying to trick me and see if I was going to give them money back, but I was kind of on a tight leash anyways, for some reason. But basically they paid me twice. But let's just say in this example, like the coding example, that the clerk accidentally entered 400 hours instead of 40 hours. An unusually large check obviously would be written to you. So the computer, however, is unaware of this fact, and unless the program is written to catch such errors, basically this could just happen all the time. So when those kind of simple programs are coded, especially like payroll, kind of like simple programs, maybe written in C or Java or something, C#, I guess. Most of those programs will probably just be done in C#, or it depends whether they're running Macs there or Windows. Macs are usually more expensive for like business applications, for like kind of like offices, for example. Macs are usually more expensive, but you may see some Macs there. I think they still could use some C programming, Objective-C perhaps, but anyways, whatever language you're using, just make sure that it has to be, basically you have to make sure that unless the program is written to catch such errors, it'll process this bad data. So you could have payroll programs processing or paying out more than it should be, for example. So that's what we're trying to fix here. So sometimes stories you hear on the news, like that you hear were computer errors causing someone to get like a large check or something in the mail or whatever. But it wasn't actually that. It's just that the software wasn't designed properly. So that's basically the story. So you should write your program in a way that bad input is never accepted. So we're trying to get to I think what they're getting at here is you want to, whatever we did in the last program, you want it to be, you want it to basically not even have to calculate bad data. You want to make sure that it only takes certain data. So bad input For this reason, you should write your program in such a way that bad input is never accepted in the first place. So it's pretty much a step before where we were. When input is given to a program, it should be inspected before it is processed. If the input is invalid, the program should discard it and prompt the user to enter the correct data. Yeah, so basically, if the input is invalid, the program should discard it right away and prompt the user to enter the correct data. This process is known as input validation. So let's do some examples on input validation. So it's similar to basically what we did before. What do we do here? So this is from the last lab. Sorry, I'm back on the screen now. So we had a calculate button. Okay, so we said once you click the calculate button, then it's going to take the data from the text box and say that if the data did not convert successfully from a string to a double, then invalid input for miles. So a message box or a dialog box will appear on the screen like a pop-up window, and it'll say invalid input for miles. It's pretty much the same thing, because a pop-up window pops up. Okay, let's just go over the example that the Canadian curriculum, university curriculum has here. So this is let's just go with this example first. So let's just have a kind of just some coding notes down here. So if int.TryParse, well, then we'll pass in hours work text box. .text. That's the first parameter. Second parameter is out, out space hours. So it's going to check that condition. We'll open an if, and then if the condition returns true, then we'll say okay, we'll nest another if and say if hours is greater than 0 and hours is less than or equal to 160, whatever, 170. Then we'll say, oops, what did I do there? Then we'll say, basically we'll continue with the code. We'll just have a note here, continue with the code in a comment. So if this is true, then we'll just continue with whatever we wanted to do. But if this wasn't, so if hours was not between 0 and hours was not, if hours was not between 0 and 170, so it's outside that range, then we'll say else. If it returns false, then we'll say message box dot show invalid hours, whatever, entered. Great, so then underneath, so sorry for that else, sorry for the if above, we'll also have an else block to basically have another case. If that condition was false, then we'll say okay, well else message box dot show The hours worked must be an integer. Okay, so the hours worked must be an integer. So what are they getting at here? So let's assume that we have an app that uses a text box named hours worked text box. So if I didn't say we were assuming that, hopefully you guys picked that up. Sorry about that. To get the hours worked. So this is just a assume we have this stuff kind of example. So assume we have an hours worked text box dot text, a variable named hours, and pretty much that's about it. So just assume that. So let's assume that the app uses a text box named what we named it, and then we have a variable named hours, as we said, which is an int. So the outer if statement uses the int.tryParse method to make sure the user has entered an integer. If so, the value is stored in the hours variable. So then the program continues into the nested if. So then the next nested if statement ensures or checks that the program processes the input only if hours is greater than 0, so it's within a certain range. So this is what we have here. So it's almost the same thing. It's really almost, it's pretty much the same thing. So let's just do one more example here. So this, let's just say this is example 1. And then we have below here example 2. So then we have here, so let's just say if int dot TryParse. And let's assume we have something like test text box dot text. So if int dot TryParse, so it's going to try to pass this string, which is a test text box dot text string, and the out we're going to save the data in test score if it's converted properly, or else remember it returns 0 if it's false, if this method call returns false. So test, oh sorry, let's just say test out test val, whatever. So then we'll have if test, oops, I'm messing up here. Okay, so if, what do we have here? Test text box and test text box dot text and test val. Okay, so if test val is greater than or equal to 0 and test val is less than or equal to 100, then we'll some code, like we'll write some code here, whatever we want. Otherwise, so if the test score is not within the range, then we'll call message box dot show was out of range. So then we'll take this if here and then write the else block for that. So we'll say else message box dot show test val must be an int wrong data type. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just kind of checking. It's just more ways to check. I mean, these are just some ways you can check. They call it input validation. you can use it to check instead of exceptions. It seems like it's almost the same thing as what we learned before. Input validation. Just checking what we learned before. So what was the actual terms that they called it here? So they called it, this was before the lab. They called, I think if they just went over the TryParse methods, that's what we learned. Validating the data in multiple text boxes, that's what we did. Preventing data conversion exceptions with the TryParse methods. That's what we did. So it's just basically continuing to use these methods. So let's just say that there is a string that can be converted to a double, then we're going to check again. Or let's just say in this case it's an int, so if there is a string that can be converted to an int, and it returns true in this case, then we'll proceed into the next block of code. And the next block of code checks if that same value that was converted, or the same value that was stored in that int variable, if that variable is in a certain range, so you can check again. And if not, then you can say, okay, well, that data, you can check if the data that you're using can be used in a certain way that you want to use it more specifically. That's pretty much all we're doing here. So we just kind of went in a little bit more in depth with more ways you can check, I guess, input validation they call it. Technically, I just call this error checking, like it's a way to check for errors or kind of thing, but they called it input validation. So let's assume that the app uses a text box named test text box to get the test score. Also assume that the test val has already been declared as an int. The outer if statement uses the int.tryparse method to make sure that the user has entered an int. If so, the value is stored in the test val variable. And the program continues to the inner if, the nested if statement. The nested if statement ensures that the coding process, the code processes the input only if test val is within range, basically. So that's pretty much it. So in the next video we'll go over radio buttons and checkboxes, so back into some more GUI stuff. So we'll be learning about some more, basically some more controls. So thanks for watching, guys. If you guys liked the video, you can like and subscribe to the channel to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.